Welcome to Coffee and Keys, where we blend our expertise and personal experiences to unlock your awareness of the real estate industry.
They're the best.
Here they are.
And now, here's your hosts, Darlene Kemp and Crystal Jacques.
And here we are.
Oh my goodness. It has been a wild week for me.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. So professionally and personally, wild. How about you?
I'm still catching my breath. The summertime's crazy. The days are so long and you still have so much work to do. You think you get time to get it all done because you got a longer time to do it.
Yeah, I know.
I guess there's still only 24 hours in a day, right?
You know what? I think I work 23 of them.
Yeah, I got your text at 2:30 in the morning.
I know, right? And I did put a LOL on there, but you know me well. If it comes to my mind, I'm like, I got to text her.
Before I forget.
Before I forget. So I did a cool thing yesterday.
What did you do?
I entered a team into the fantasy football draft. I have never done that before. So
I wouldn't know where to begin.
You know what? I have RBs, I have WRs, I have Ks, I have Ds. I have a Q.
Is it really that time already, though? I mean, think about it, the fall in football, and here we are right around the corner. Our kids are going back to school. It's crazy times.
Isn't it crazy? So I've never done this. So I'm going to keep everybody posted on this because let me tell you, I was scratching my head. You know, as much football as I watch, and I do watch it, this is deep.
Like I said, I wouldn't know how to begin. My husband's a diehard 49er football fan. And so, I've just spent the last 30-some years, rooting for the team that's playing against the 49ers.
Well, look, I got a Kansas City defense. So. But we're all over the place. I like the Cardinals. That's who I'm rooting for. My husband likes the Patriots. My daughter likes Detroit. My son likes, San Diego. So
football games at your house are just fun.
Oh yeah, we're on FaceTime, we're on texting, we're in front of each other, just giving each other crap. So it'll be interesting now that I'm in the fan. I don't know how to trade players, so if somebody out there can tell me how to do that, because
I'm sure you'll get a lot more calls on that than our topic for today.
Probably. I was like, I'm looking at the pictures because it's ESPN. So I'm looking at the pictures and I go, oh, he's cute. Okay, I'm going to take him.
You're going to have the winning team and you're going to go, how did you figure out all these stats? Oh, they were cute.
He was cute.
Looked good in a jersey.
You know those tight ends.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to have a pretty good topic today.
We are.
You and I were talking about how the news has said interest rates have gone down, which kind of leads into this because you're getting busy.
Yeah. I mean, again, my belief is it's always a good time to buy a home.
Right.
But it's especially nice when rates are coming down a little bit, right?
Right.
And, and the market is kind of normalizing a little bit and sellers are being negotiable a little bit.
Yeah. At least my sellers have been.
Yeah. So, I always say whatever the new normal is, our topic. Okay, so once you've got a ratified contract, usually what's the next step, right? The first thing you do, even before you order appraisal or get everything over to me, is you schedule that home inspection. And, as a lender, I don't get involved in that part a lot. So I hear some things that they ask me and I'm going, that's a question for your agent. So we figured that would be a great time to come up with some topics on home inspections. Right?
Yeah.
So we've got our 5-question breakdown. Right? So
yes. Okay. Shoot, Darlene.
And this time it's your ball game.
What question is first? I'm ready.
What is a home inspection? Right?
Ooh,
I think some
question.
people are not even 100% sure on what exactly a home inspection is and what does it cover. What is it different? Why is it different from an appraisal? Why is it different from a walkthrough? Why is it different from all those? So what is a home inspection? So question number 2, though, why should a buyer get a home inspection? Or should a buyer get a home inspection?
That's a good one.
Yeah,
And we can filter back about 3 years ago when people weren't.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. And it's a good question because on the lender part, we're talking about here are all the fees that are due for your closing costs. Do you want a survey? Do you want this? Do you want that? And a lot of times by the time I get to them on that part, they've already spent the money for the home inspection. Right. So it's a good question to say, is it really worth getting a home inspection? And my advice is always I wouldn't buy a house without one. But that's a good question for your agent.
Yeah, you're right.
So question number 3, should a seller fear a home inspection or should they want one? Do they want one? What does a seller think about these home inspections?
Ooh, good question.
We'll dig down deep into that one too, right? Mm-hmm. And number 4, I think a lot of buyers and sellers want the answer to this one. Does the seller have to fix everything on that home inspection?
Ooh,
are they liable for everything? Do they have to do it? We'll find out. And number 5.
Inquiring minds want to know.
Number 5, I might get in a little bit. Is the lender required to get a copy of the home inspection?
Ooh, now that's a topic that you and I have talked a lot about. Yes.
Who does that home inspection belong to, and who's allowed to give it?
Ooh,
right?
Good question.
I think this is very valid questions, and a lot of people ask them all the time. And really, it's kind of the first step after ratifying. Once you find the house that you love, right, and you've written an offer and you've negotiated, and now it's a contract because you have a meeting of the minds. But it's a contract that's normally contingent, and I'll let you speak on that, on this home inspection.
That is true.
So what does the contingent on the home inspection mean? And that's not even a question I had in there. But right before, what is a home inspection? What does that mean? So what is a home inspection and what does the contingency mean?
Okay, so a home inspection is a visual examination of the property condition, the physical structure, and the system of the home. So the key word there is visual.
Oh.
Key word is visual.
Say that one more time because I'm not sure I got all those words.
Me either. I'm not sure I said them all.
Only because you say the words and the thing that's going through my mind is, what does that really mean? Okay, right. So what is a home inspection? Again.
Okay. So it's a visual examination of a home or the property to look at the property condition, the property structure, and to look at the systems of the home.
Okay, perfect.
So I say visual because I've had a couple just recently. These home inspections were strange, meaning on one of them, which I thought was the strangest. So the home, I got the, I was the listing agent. I got the report. I read the report. The report was good. I mean, there is no perfect home out there.
Right.
I considered the report.
Talk about that too.
Yep. Yeah. I considered the report good. Then I get a call from the buyer's agent saying, well, they want to know if the seller is interested in removing a wall to make sure that the ductwork is correctly routed. And I was like...
And your home inspection doesn't have any special... Yeah.
So...
Remove walls. No.
It's a visual inspection.
That makes sense,
we don't
You're not going to tear down walls to find out what's behind the walls. Yeah.
I told her, and of course, as an agent, I can't make those decisions. We always have to present everything to our sellers. But before I did present that to the seller, I talked through it with her, and I said, based on what? Because I'm reading this inspection report, and he says everything's good in that category. Right. Everything's good.
So there's nothing that would be suspicious to have a reason that you're going to knock down a wall. Yeah.
And I can't believe she asked. And that was my second thing to her.
But again,
I can't believe you asked that.
And she probably said, well, I represent the buyers. So if the buyers tell me I need to ask, then, you had to ask the seller, right?
Yeah. I had to ask the seller.
The things that we see. Yeah. Can we break? Yeah. So that makes sense when you say visual inspection of the property. So, obviously they're not going to be tearing through the walls and the roofs and the floors to get a closer view, but it's a visual inspection just to see. And most of the times by that visual inspection, they could identify any like red flags, right?
Any red flags. And that's what you're looking for. That's what you're looking for. You're not looking for cosmetic things, you know. So the buyer standing in the house for 2.5 to 3 hours, looking around, and they decide they don't like the color of the paint. That's not going to get picked up on a home inspection.
Right. Yeah. How clean it is, maybe not. Right. Now, how clean an air filter might be, because that could affect the systems, right? So maybe that part, right? So it's the system. So the visual inspection to see mainly what's wrong, if there's any indication that there might be some structural issues. And again, not every home inspector is an engineer, though, right?
That is correct.
So they're just going to identify those issues that are wrong with that.
So, yeah, in my business and my circle and my team, that, you know, there's a team behind every agent. Right. I am very spoiled, and I truly believe and understand that. Yeah. I am very spoiled because my wonderful, wonderful home inspector, he is a licensed contractor. So we might get a little bit more knowledge about a component and how it works and what it's supposed to do and what it's not doing, rather than, you know, the average home inspector.
Right. So, but they're not all of them are, and then not all of them are electricians or plumbers, or, you know, so they're looking at the systems and the structures to look for any red flags that may indicate they need to get a plumber or electrician or somebody.
And that's what they say. Recommend. The home inspector said, you know, the water heater's not working. It's not reaching 130 degrees. Recommend a plumber to, you know, evaluate and repair or replace. I mean, that's usually what you see there. They are not experts in every trade.
Right. Yeah. Right. They're just there to identify any red flags that you might have caution on.
That is
so. So that kind of covers, you know, what that home inspection is really just somebody going out there and to say, hey, you have a red flag here, you have a red flag. They might be able to tell you like life expectancy of your systems, right?
Yeah.
Because again, you buy a house and hot water heaters only last so long. Typically, HVAC units, you know, have a certain life expectancy, right?
Right.
Roofs might have a certain life expectancy on them.
I think everything does.
Yeah. So they're just kind of out there inspecting that stuff. So why should a buyer get a home inspection?
Ooh, good question, because let's go back 3 years, you know, when everything was hot and heavy, and I was out there too, and it was so competitive that
they were waiving.
Yeah, they were waiving that home inspection. Now, fortunately, I know how to write an offer. So I had buyers waiving their home inspection as well. But what I would do, and I think this is very important, in those offers that I wrote, I would put major components must be in proper working order at buyer's walkthrough. So therefore, even though we saw the house, we competed for it, and we won, and we don't go back for 30 days, my buyer is not going to get a component that doesn't work.
Right.
You know.
So, but you brought up another word that maybe not every buyer understands. So there's the home inspection in the beginning, but then right before closing, you go and do the walkthrough. So what's the difference between a walkthrough and a home inspection?
Ooh, good question. So a home inspection is the inspection. We just talked about that, you know, the visual examination of the home. A walkthrough is usually done at the end of the transaction before you go to closing, just to make sure that the house is in the same condition as it was when you saw it last. And usually when you saw it last was your home inspection. In the case that people waive their home inspection, the last time you saw it is when you put the offer in there, right? Yeah. So you don't want to walk in, you know, it's been 30, 40 days, and you walk in the house and there's no fireplace. You know, they rolled up the
pool. Wall's been torn down.
Yeah, the walls have been torn down. Toilets are gone. Fridge is gone. You know? I had one where they did take the toilet, by the way. They sure did. Yeah. They
now,
sure did.
I've had them where they've removed plants out of the yard. I've heard about that too.
I had one that they did that too.
Yeah.
So that's what your walkthrough's for, to make sure that what is written in that contract as to what conveys to the buyer is still there. So yeah, there is a difference, and again, the timeline moves. If you waived your home inspection, the last time you saw that house is when you put the offer in and you won. If you didn't,
and you didn't see any roof leaks or anything like that when you walked through it, and all of a sudden you've got water dripping down.
That's right.
That might be an issue.
That's right.
So it is just, but it's not really to like check the components to make sure that the hot water heater is going to last you another 2 years. You don't,
You don't re-inspect.
Right. So you're just making sure that they're in working order.
Yes, they're in working order. That's what I write in my offers. So yeah, you don't know how old the components are. You can judge depending on what the age of the house is. If the house is 3 years old, then you're going to think your components are 3 years old and your roof is 3 years old. The house is, I've got a listing right now that the house was built in 1860.
Wow. So
I don't think anything is original there.
I'm sure most of it has been through its life expectancy.
If it is original. So in that case, it's hard to judge. If we received an offer with no home inspection, it would be hard for the buyer to judge how old the components are at that point. Right. So you kind of just do some simple math there if you're going to waive your home inspection.
Right. But so what do you think the biggest reason the buyer needs that home inspection, and why should they get that home inspection? Because I mean, again, we've seen them without them and things that could go wrong, right, from waiving them. But why are they really important?
Well, the home inspection provides a detailed report to the buyer, which supports informative decision making. Right. Now, not every buyer attends their home inspection, and especially being in Hampton Roads and you've got military people. Right. I've sold plenty of homes by FaceTime. I've sold plenty of homes, to people that, just want to just write it. Yeah, So you get a detailed report, or at least my home inspector will provide one. And we always, in that case, if they don't attend the home inspection, because there's been plenty of times where it's just me and the home inspector, my home inspector invites a telephone call from them. Sometimes I've done a video, because I've had people on a ship or a submarine or something, and they can't, talk on the phone. So I do a video from the home inspection with the home inspector doing the summary, and summarizing it. And then when they,
it's like a little educational piece. I actually think I've been to one of them, and they actually took the person out to the garage to show them little tricks on the garage door opener, as far as when to lock it and unlock it and some things like that. So, I mean, it definitely, if the buyer can attend, I can see where that would be a benefit, that they could get a little bit of education on their house and know what they're getting into. But really also, I mean, I'm from the loan point of view, and we're dealing with first-time home buyers, and they need all of their money in order to get into the house. So they may not have a big cushion to be able to afford a major replacement after closing, right? HVAC goes out. The HVAC is not working. And now they get into the house and they didn't have a home inspection. The HVAC is not working. It's summer. It's 100 degrees outside. What do? Right?
Yeah. What do you do?
Yeah.
Because
I think we got from Catherine, Virginia, especially Virginia is a
buyer beware
state. So
I have one now. We just closed, and the buyer chose to hire the termite company. I represented the seller, and the buyer chose to hire his own termite company and receive his own report, right? Now, I've had buyers do that I've represented, but I want a copy of the report, because I want to look at the report to see if there's anything in there red flags that I recognize that maybe the buyer doesn't recognize. Right. And even on the other side, because that was not my buyer, but as a buyer's agent, I send it to the listing agent as well, because maybe I missed something that they know. They know. Mm-hmm. So in this case, the buyer's agent did not send me the report. But the fact that we closed, that tells me everything's good, right?
Right. You would assume, hey, they got the report, they saw the report, everybody thinks good.
Yeah, I didn't think two seconds about it. Once we closed, we're done. Now we're closed. I get a call from the agent about 4 days after closing. Well, my buyer found active termites in the house. And I said, okay, well, what is the seller going to do with it? Now, that's an interesting question. What is the seller going to do about this? And I said,
didn't know. It's not his house anymore.
That's right. I said, this is your buyer's house. The seller is not obligated to do anything. If the buyer got a report from his termite company, and I said, I never got a copy of it, but I said, I'm going to assume it's clear because we're closed.
Yeah.
Because if it wasn't clear, we wouldn't have closed.
Why would you have closed? As representative.
Exactly. So she said, I know, but, there's termites. I said, well, go back to the person that did the termite inspection. Mm-hmm. He missed it. Yeah. And she said, I did. And he said, it's not his responsibility. I said, okay. Well, it's not my seller's responsibility either. I don't know what to tell you. And she says, well, I guess I'm going to have to pay for a termite not inspection, but treatment. And I said, well, that's interesting. I said, and that's very nice of you. Either. That's right. I said, that's very nice of you, because I said, this is how I see it. You had a home inspection, and that home inspector missed the termites. You had a termite inspection, and that termite company missed the termites. I said, it's not that the agent had an inspection and the agent missed the termites, but if you want to pay for it, then you pay for it. I said, we're out. I told her, So she said, I know, but I had to ask and stuff like that. So then somehow the buyer got a hold of my seller's information and called the seller and told her she's responsible. So here we are about not 2 weeks, maybe about 10 days after closing, and I get a call from her. And I said, do not do it. You are not responsible. Do not do it.
She didn't know anything about it.
That's right. And I said, and I asked her, I said, I would think that you had to sign this termite letter. And she said, I did. And I said, because I never saw it. And she said, I did have to sign it. And I said, and what does it say on that termite letter to you that you signed? And she said, there's no visible evidence of termites. I said, that's all you need to know. So we don't know if those termites came after.
Right.
They had to walk through.
Did they knock down a wall? Did they move in and knock down a wall?
I have no idea. I'm not going to ask. But I said, we have no idea if it happened after, and I know that termites, they don't happen that quick. They happen over the course of years.
Right. But at the same time, they only show up seasonally, from what I understand, as far as when they actually will show up and show active. So it is hard. I mean, usually what they're looking for is existing termite damage that would indicate that there was termites, and if there was termites, right. And they ask it to make sure that it was treated if there was evidence of any insurance issues or termite issues from there. But yeah, so again, these inspections are no guarantees. Obviously, they're not any guarantees, and there's never, when you get a home inspection, seeing some of the visible evidence of termites is only one thing, and then there's all the other components that they have in there. So they're really just kind of looking around to see, safety, structural soundness issues, right? Things like that, like like we were talking about the electrical, right? So, and an appraiser is going to go out there and look at the property too. But again, he's appraising it from value. A lot of people and a lot of buyers think that, I don't need a home inspection. The appraiser is going to come look at the house. I'm going, appraisers are not trained to be contractors. They're trained to look at houses, one comparable to another. Now, if they see something that gives a red flag that could be a safety issue, they could point it out, and then it might have to be repaired or fixed. But again, all they're going to do is say, I saw this. I recommend you get this person,
Right.
I've seen, some things that look like it could be electrical issues, getting, electrician out there to look at it.
So the appraiser,
like
they can require repairs, and you know that because I had one just recently where he required a repair. And that's interesting because that repair was also in the home inspection, which we had already had, agreed to do. But he came back and I had the nicest appraiser ever, because some of them are not nice. I've kind of made mad several appraisers over the course of my years of being a realtor. But this guy was really nice because he called me and he says, "Hey, look, I'm gonna hit you on this. It's got to be repaired." And I said, "You know what? It's on the home inspection report, which one of your questions at the end is going to address how this is handled.
How it handles with the lender. Does the lender get a copy of it? Yeah,
that's right. So in that case, they really appraisers appreciate when you're upfront and say, "Oh, we're going to repair it, and get it done," and they're not so mean to you.
Yeah. It's nice that they give you a heads up saying, "I'm getting ready to turn this appraisal. I've seen this." And again, they're there to look at red flags.
Right.
And then to advise based on what they see. But they're really there to figure out value and protecting the lender in the event of a default. So if there is something that's obvious or structural or safety issue, they want the lender to know that there could be an issue on the value part of it because of that. Right. So again, we kind of understand that it's important for a buyer to get the home inspection so that they know what they're getting into, so that they know when they buy the house, what they're willing to deal with. And some buyers are willing to do more than others. Some buyers who have a, handyman background, they can say, I'm not worried about this, I'm not worried about that. But number 3, should a seller fear a home inspection? And I'm going to put that right in there with number 4 because it's going to kind of go together. So does the seller have to fix everything on the home inspection?
So this is directed to sellers. This statement.
Yeah.
If you know, you must disclose. If there is a defect with your house, you must tell your agent, if you're represented by an agent, who therefore must disclose that to their buyer.
Right. And that's like material fact or something, so you have to disclose all
yes, latent and material facts. So that's why you want to have a home inspection, because they can't come back and say, they didn't tell me, especially if it's in their report. Maybe you don't know what's going on, but it's been disclosed in the buyer's home inspection report. Or maybe you do know, because I have a listing right now. There's 3 items that we do know is wrong with the house, and that has been disclosed to the buyer's agent. And I'm hoping the buyer's agent told the buyer. I would think she did. But when they get to the house and they do their home inspection, because we haven't had it yet, and it comes up, it's been disclosed. Even if she didn't tell her buyer, now it's been disclosed to the buyer.
Right. So the buyer is aware, and then he chooses whether or not he wants to go through with the transaction, which
that's right.
Is what that contingency means, is that the buyer is going to get a home inspection. And if he doesn't like the results of the home inspection, then he doesn't have to move forward. But if he's good with the home inspection, then it's a meeting of the minds and you have a contract, right?
You have a contract. Yeah. So I think I know I've had those sellers that don't want a home inspection of their house because they see it from the perspective of, they're going to pick my house apart.
Yeah.
And I quickly get them over that. Get them over that and say, listen, and everybody knows right now, because our last podcast was about this, there's a lot of lawsuits out there. People are not shy to sue. And if they think you knew something and you didn't tell them, and there's plenty of those lawsuits out there, this will protect you, seller. This will protect you by letting them do a home inspection on your house.
Right. And we all know, so again, with buyers beware too. And does the seller have to fix everything? It's really difficult to tell somebody their baby's ugly. So if you got a seller that loves their house, right? They love their house. They've done some of the work to it on their own, which may have been a problem to begin with, right? They were handymen doing things they didn't really know they should be doing. But they love their home, and they may just be moving out of the area or whatever, but their home has been their home. It's their man's castle, right? So now you get a buyer that's coming in and telling them everything that's wrong with their house. They may not take that very well, right?
No, some of them don't, and it's funny because during the showings, and I'll go back and answer the second part of this question, but I had a listing just recently, and this is probably another podcast, but she had cameras in the house, right? Oh. And so every time somebody went in that house, she would watch and she would listen, and then she would call me and say, "Tell them that my couch is not ugly. Tell them this, tell them that." I was like,
because, people have a tendency to take things that belong to them personally because it means something to them. Right. It may not mean the same thing to other people, but it means something to them, right?
Right. So when we got to the home inspection, you can imagine how she was with that. If she was protecting the couch, can you imagine the things that this buyer came up with? That she actually was very hurt by the home inspection. And
they take it personally. They love their home. Yeah.
Had to go over and stroke her hair, tell her everything's going to be okay.
And the buyer is also working from a little bit of fear mentality sometimes because they're going, I just spent a lot of money for this house. And now, a little bit of that fear is setting in, which we all know buyer's remorse is common. So it's really just kind of talking people through that step. We understand now you're really anxious. You've got a ratified contract. You just bought a home. You're getting your home inspection, and the home inspection is for your protection so that you can determine whether or not you want to move forward. But it doesn't mean that the seller has to fix everything on there, and it doesn't mean that everything needs to be fixed, right? I mean, there's a lot of things on there that are really not a big deal. Right. On that home inspection.
And you're absolutely right. The seller doesn't have to do anything. They don't have to fix anything if they don't want to. I've had plenty of sellers that said, "Chris and cross, I'm not doing anything." And then I warn them, if you come back, because some of it probably needs to be done. If they come back, we send this to them, that buyer can walk and you start all over. And guess what? The next buyer's going to see the same thing.
Yeah.
So you'll never sell your house. If something really needs, if your HVAC isn't working, if it's not working properly, if it's not cooling and it's not heating, and you cross that off, the next buyer is going to say, have it looked at. And if you cross that off, you'll never sell the house. So,
so you might as well get somebody else there to look at it now.
That's right. Yeah. So, I try to stay logical, from a standpoint, because again, you face, unemotional, very logical, and you do face these buyers and sellers that are emotional. So when I get the crisscross, I'm like, okay, all right, so let's talk about this. And I get where you're coming from. And I just had to have this conversation last night with the seller.
Yeah.
I get where you're coming from, but look at this, because you're going to see it again. You can let this buyer walk, but the next buyer that comes, guess what? This is serious. We need to address this. Let's not address the silly stuff like, the paint is gray and they want blue. Let's not address that. Let's crisscross that.
Yeah.
But it's got to have heating and air. It has to.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're right. Sellers don't have to address everything.
Have to do anything. Mm-hmm.
Right. But
it's all a part of that negotiation. And
exactly.
Again, we always like to do the right thing, but it's making sure that they are aware of what the consequences are, whatever they decide to do.
Right.
And they choose to do it that way anyway. So you're right. If a seller says, nope, I'm not doing anything, well then, do you need to sell your house?
Right.
How sellable
do you want to sell your
house? Defect? Yeah. And is it going to take? How much longer is it going to take you to find a new buyer? How much is it going to cost you in mortgage payments and taxes and insurance that time while you're looking for the new buyer? And how much is it going to take you to do the repair? Because the next buyer may ask you to do the same thing again. So, or take it off in the value, right?
And 9 times out of 10, they do. Yeah. So it's our job to remain level-headed. Because when you first meet, when you first meet with that seller to list that house, let me tell you, you get the I ain't doings. the whole time. I ain't doing this. I ain't doing that. I'm not. And I just sit there and I say, okay.
Because to them, the house has been perfectly fine for them.
Right. Yeah.
So now you want me to do all this just because I'm selling it?
I just bank that. I bank all that in the back of my head. I don't sit there and try to debate it and make them agree. I just bank it because you know what? When that contract comes through, and 9 times out of 10, when they're saying I have done enough to this house before we listed it, guess what? Yeah. That I ain't doing is on that PICRA. And and I present it to them and they say, okay, I'll do it. Okay, let's go.
Yeah. So they'll say it doesn't hurt to ask, but the seller doesn't have to do it. Right. So then they really shouldn't fear it because it protects them, because if they'd have known and didn't disclose it, then they could be in trouble too. So
that's right.
It could be a win-win doing those home inspections.
It usually is. It usually is. I don't, and again, I sit in front of many people that I don't know, and at that point I start evaluating their personality against mine. Either we're going to be a mesh or we're not. And I know which angle to present things to them, so that they understand, at that point. Right. So.
Right. And I think the biggest thing is get everybody to understand what, with every decision is a consequence, right?
Yeah.
So if the seller says, no, I'm not doing anything, the consequence could be the buyer can walk.
That's right. And who wants that?
And then the buyer says the same thing. He just found the house that he loved, and they're asking the seller to do this nitpicky stuff like, caulk around the door. Or things that
I've had a PICRA full of that. That's the crisscross.
So then the buyer says, if the seller doesn't do it, I'm going to walk. Well, then they're back up to house searching again. So I guess the key is just really giving everybody the understanding of the pros and the cons. With every decision is a consequence. It could be a consequence one way or another. Right.
Yeah.
So
I think most buyers and sellers arrive at the right answer on their own when it's presented in front of them.
A logical situation. Yeah.
They do. I mean, I very rarely. I've had my share of taking on my clients, but very rarely in my career have I had to do that, because I just sit back and say, well, and again, in Hampton Roads, you have 5 days to, decide what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. And I usually start at that point filtering out contractors to the house to get estimates. And then when we have a list of what it's going to cost, okay, now you have 1 day to decide what you're going to do and if you're going to do. And they arrive at the right answer by themselves.
Yeah. Right. Because it was presented logically, and sometimes you just take the emotion out of it, and you put yourself in other people's shoes, and really the sellers want to sell and the buyers want to buy. I mean, ultimately, it's just a matter of a meeting of the minds and getting them back on track with that one. So, I just think that home inspections are a really good thing, so that buyers know what they're getting into, and they're paying a lot of money for the house, and they gotta have a little bit of warm and fuzzy, right? When they move in, to know that.
I just had a seller go the opposite way, which really surprised me. But we got the PICRA. And he saw the PICRA. He was quiet for about 2 days, and I reached out to him. So where are we? And he goes, oh, repairs are done. And I did A, B, C, D, E, F. And I was like, whoa. Because again, the house needs to be in the same condition. That's right. So he went the other way. He started replacing lights and faucets. And I was like, we can't do that.
What if they didn't like that faucet? What if they don't like that light? What if they plan on doing it on their own? Exactly. Yeah, everything's got to be in the same condition as what they bought it for. Your taste may not be their taste.
That's right.
They want that old fan back.
That's what I said. You didn't throw anything away, did you? They might appreciate that, but don't throw it away, because they might like it, because it was an older house, and it had some history to it.
We call it personality.
Yeah, exactly.
That house has its own personality. Don't take the personality away yet, right?
So it's funny, because we did hit on that, but it could be to the good or the bad, when you start, changing things. But anyway. Yeah.
And the last question was,
What's
is the lender required to get a copy of the inspection?
Ooh, this is on you, Darlene. So we've had our discussions on this.
Yes, we have. Typically, I always recommend a home inspection to every. Look at, I would never tell you not to get one here, but I am going to tell you it's an option. We do not require it, and we do not require it, and we really don't want to see it when you get it. It's going to be your choice on what you want the seller to do. You don't want somebody out there telling you what you have to do. It's your choice on whether or not you want to go through this or not. However, we do have the appraiser that's going to go out there, and the appraiser is going to tell us, based on comps, what the value is, but they're also going to tell us if there's any red flags or anything that we need to look at, especially, and depending on VA appraisal, FHA appraisal, they have their certain guidelines, things that, again, on conventional, they say conventional really doesn't care, but they do care about structural issues, and they do care about some things in the property. Like it really does, your carpet can be ugly and dirty and yucky, and as long as this carpet is fine, but when you pull it up and now there's nothing but a, wood sheathing floor with no, it's got to have flooring, right? It just can't be nothing, or there's a big rip in it and it's a trip hazard. Now it's dangerous, so that has to be done, and then all of a sudden you look and there's, wires hanging out of the wall from an electric outlet that was yanked out, It's got live wires. That's dangerous. That's going to have to be done. So from that point of view, we will require repairs. We do, typically on a VA loan, we have to have that termite. Nowadays, we have to have the termite signed by the buyer and the seller.
I know.
In this area, mainly because this is such, a wet area. But do I want to see a home inspection? No.
That was going to be my question. Do you need to see my inspection report?
We are not required. We're not requiring you to get a home inspection. If you get one, that's up to you. That's done outside of the closing. That's done outside, then you can decide whether or not you want to follow through with the transaction, right? If you decide to go through with the transaction, do I want a copy of the home inspection again? No. If you send it to me and I see something on there that's really bad, I can't pretend like I didn't see it.
Oh,
so if you want to keep the negotiations between yourselves, you do that. So I would recommend don't send it to me.
So is that lender specific, or is that all lenders? Is that mortgage company specific?
I'm assuming it's all I can tell you is what guidelines specific are. Okay, every lender is a little bit differently. They may try to get one if they, anyway. Most of them don't want to see it because they really believe that is a buyer's choice as to, the property. And really, we're looking at a lien issue. In other words, we're lending this borrower a house that they want to buy. We are not choosing the house for them. We're not choosing the condition of the house for them. All we're making sure of is that the money that we're lending them to borrow on this house, that in the event of a default, we could sell the house and get the money back. So we have to make sure that the house is safe, number one, so that it won't burn down tomorrow, or that, somebody's willing to pay the same amount of money in the condition that it's in. Right. So when we send the appraiser out there, that's one reason he's looking at the condition, saying, okay, yeah, houses down the street have sold for this, but they were in much better condition, or houses down the street have sold for this is in great condition. So we're looking at value, we're looking for safety, and we're looking for soundness on the property. But other than that, we're not experts in home inspections. We're not experts in electrical and plumbing and all that kind of good stuff. So that stuff really is left up to the experts. And so I would say that, do I want to see a home inspection? No. If I see something that raises red flags, I may require you to get certain inspections and spend more money on electricians and plumbers and things like that. And it's really not our job to tell you that. So I would say, that is between the buyer and the seller, and to be negotiated outside of ratifying the contract. Once the contract's ratified, we need to know all terms. Now, if you happen to put what we call the PICRA, which I'll let you explain what that is,
property
into
inspection,
an addendum to
contingency removal
addendum, right, which then could require repairs, right? So as a lender, we're required to make sure that the contract is fulfilled, including anything that's put on the contract as repairs. So if you mention the home inspection or the PICRA in the contract and you make it a part of the contract, now we're going to ask you for it because you made it a part of the contract.
Yes.
So my suggestion is don't make it a part of the contract.
Paragraph 20 is property conditions.
Right. So the underwriter's going to go, oh, what does that mean?
Yeah, what is this? What do you mean there's no roof on the house and put it on there? I've had that.
Yeah. So my caution is when you are, writing for repairs on that contract, don't reference the home inspection because now you made it a part of the contract and we have to see it. And we really don't want to see it because then we're going to make you might have to jump through a whole lot of hoops that are not necessary. That's really between you and the seller and your inspections and how you're willing to do that. So I would say if there's a repair that needs to be done, as a lender, we have to make sure that it is showing on the closing disclosure as an invoice being paid or that it's done. We just have to make sure that the contract has been fulfilled in its fullest, right? So, if it's a part of the contract, then the lender may say, yeah, I need to see the home inspection. And I'm asking you for the home inspection because there's something in the contract that is referencing the home inspection. Otherwise, how do we even know you got one, right? Now, you may have an appraiser go out there and say, hey, something's funny here. They may ask you for a home inspection. Again, I'm not an appraiser.
Ooh, have I ever had an appraiser? I don't think I've ever had an appraiser ask me for no, I have. I had an appraiser, and I called you about it. That's right. I had an appraiser ask me for my PICRA, and I called you. I said, do I have to provide that? Because that, like you said, opens up Pandora's box. Now they see everything, and there wasn't really anything on there, but it was just the idea of setting a precedence for me, and having an answer to that, because if I do not have to, provide it, I'm not going to. Yeah. But
so the appraiser is supposed to have all the full and complete contract, and addendums are a part of the contract, right? So again, it just depends on what he's why he's asking you for it, right? So, if he's just asking it because he sees something that he thought might be an issue, but he's not 100% sure, and he just wants to check himself by looking at the paper, it belongs to the buyer. You can say no. But if you made it a part of the contract, now he has to see it.
No, he has to see it.
Because it was part of the contract. So, if it's a part of the contract, the answer is going to be it's a part of the contract. So you can amend it, take it out, whatever. But
I was afraid not to send it because I go, he could say, I don't have that, so I'm not giving you, an appraisal.
Whatever. I'm not giving you any value off of that because it's not working, right? So, again, it comes back to really understanding the full contract, and that a lender is required to have the full contract and all the addendums to the contract. And if the addendums are referencing something that makes it a part of the contract. Do we really want to see a home inspection? No.
I don't
because
want you
again,
to
that's
see
that's not a part that, a lender should not, I'm going to stay in my lane. I lend money, right, to borrowers who are qualified.
That's a good way to describe it.
And they pay us an interest, right? So I'm worried about the money. And the house is a security instrument. So all the thing that the house is doing for the lender is securing in the event of a default. Okay. So that's outside my lane. That's up to the buyer and the seller to negotiate that home inspection and that PICRA and all that stuff. That's outside my expertise. Tell me about loan guidelines. I'll tell you what. And really, loan guidelines.
Show me the money.
If you meet the guidelines, you get the money. If you don't, you don't. But that's where sometimes repairs come into play because they want to make sure that they're lending on the security instrument is giving them some protection in the event of a default, right? And of course, VA and FHA and the government loans, they're really wanting to protect those buyers too. VA loans want to protect the veterans. So yeah, there are some things that they're going to look out for because they really want to protect them. So they're going to, require, certain things like termite inspections. But yeah, I mean, all in all, that's the agents, that's what you guys are experts in, is trying to negotiate. And again, you're not an expert in electrical and plumbing and housing and inspection. That's why you have a home inspector go out there, because you're an expert in figuring out explaining what their rights are, and they can choose from there on how to do contracts. So again, it's all understanding what everybody's
keeping them out of trouble.
Exactly. Stay in your lane.
Keeping them out of trouble. That's right. Wow. Well, I think I'm looking at our time here.
I know, and we're going on again, but yeah, I think we made all 5 questions. So that was a good topic. I think it's really, I think it's hopefully it helped those buyers that are out there and a little understanding of what that home inspection is, right?
Yeah. And again, we're always available for questions if anybody has any questions. If there's something we haven't hit on, but I think we did a good job.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was a good one for you.
Yeah, I know, anyway. Right? All right.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to get excited about our next one.
Coffee and Keys is brought to you by Darlene Kemp, VP, Senior Loan Officer, NMLS ID 173897. Atlantic Coast Mortgage, LLC is an equal housing lender. NMLS ID 643114. www.nmlsconsumeraccess.org. And Crystal Jacques, Realtor for both RE/MAX Allegiance, 4000 Virginia Beach Boulevard, Suite 164, Virginia Beach, Virginia 23452. Office phone 757-490-7300. And RE/MAX Professionals, 20,241 North 67th Avenue, Suite A1 Glendale, Arizona, 85308. Office phone 623-362-3000. Each office is independently owned and operated and supports the Fair Housing Act and Equal Opportunity Housing.